Lee Era was a woman whose life was measured in scavenged scraps and narrow escapes. Her only goal was to survive another night in the city's concrete cracks with her dignity intact. But on a rain-drenched, freezing midnight, she was caught in the wrong alley, clutched by the collar by a man whose shadow governed the city's underworld. The man was Seo Min-jae, a titan of industry and blood. What Era didn't know as she felt his cold leather gloves tighten against her throat was that she hadn't just been caught trespassing. She had stumbled into a biological miracle. The shirt that tore in his grip didn't just reveal her skin. It revealed an irreversible link to a world ruled by a terrifying enforcer who had spent 20 years believing his bloodline ended in ash. The introduction. Lee Era was a ghost in a city of neon lights. At 19, she balanced the weight of heavy crates in the shipping yards with the constant, shivering vigilance required of a girl with no home. She was sharp, wary, and knew the value of silence, usually the kind that kept you invisible when the black sedans rolled by. Her dark, tangled curls often hid her eyes, but they couldn't hide the raw determination that kept her moving. She was driven by an uncompromising memory, a lullaby from a mother she couldn't name, and a dream of a warm room where the door actually locked. That dream was her North Star, but the path to it was a jagged, exhausting climb through the city's refuse. It was 2 a.m., and the city's heart was cold. Era was sorting through the discarded remains behind a luxury hotel, her fingers numb from the downpour. Her stomach let out a familiar, hollow ache against her ribs. She glanced toward the black SUV idling near the service entrance, observing the man who stepped out into the rain. He was a study in controlled intensity, dressed in a tailored black suit that made him look like a blade. He had a stark, sculpted face and eyes that didn't just look, they searched. His presence was a heavy, suffocating weight in the empty alley. He was the kind of man who didn't just walk. He owned the ground beneath him. The neon hum of Neo-Soul was a distant prayer from the guts of the sump. Down here the air tasted of ozone and oxidized copper, Era's favorite flavor. It meant the scrap was fresh. Era crouched behind a rusted bulkhead, her fingers dancing over a discarded Neuralink interface. To most it was junk, to her it was tomorrow's dinner. She didn't mind the grime under her fingernails, but she did mind the sudden rhythmic clack-clack-clack of Italian leather on wet concrete. That sound didn't belong in the sump. That sound belonged to the gilded district. The deal. Peering through a gap in the corrugated metal, Era saw them. For men in charcoal suits, their silhouettes sharp enough to cut the fog. In the center stood a man who radiated a quiet, terrifying stillness. Min-jae, the dragon of the East Side. He wasn't shouting, he didn't need to. He was watching a heavy chrome briefcase click open, revealing rows of shimmering violet data shards. Era held her breath. If she could nick just one of those, she wouldn't just eat for a week, she could buy the whole damn building. Snap. A stray plastic wire tie gave way under her boot. In the silence of the alley it sounded like a gunshot. The confrontation. Before Era could even scramble backward, a shadow eclipsed her. A hand, gloved in silk-soft leather, gripped the back of her oversized flight jacket and hauled her into the light of the clearing. A rat in the walls, a voice purred. It was smooth, cold, and utterly devoid of mercy. Min-jae stepped closer. He was taller than the holo suggested, smelling of expensive sandalwood and impending doom. He tilted her chin up with the tip of a polished cane. "You've seen too much, scavenger," Min-jae said, his eyes scanning her face with clinical indifference. "And in my world, witnesses are an overhead I can't afford. I was just looking for copper." Era hissed, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I don't care about your glowing rocks." The reveal. Min-jae sighed, a sound of genuine boredom. He motioned to one of his subordinates. "Dispose of her. Make it clean." As the guard reached for her, Era lunged, twisting her body to break the grip. In the struggle, the collar of her heavy, grease-stained jacket tore open, sliding down her right shoulder. The movement froze Min-jae mid-turn. The street lamp above flickered, casting a harsh strobe light over Era's collarbone. There, etched in deep crimson against her pale skin, was a birthmark, a jagged geometric starburst that looked less like a fluke of nature and more like a brand. Min-jae's composure shattered. He lunged forward, not to strike, but to grab her shoulder. His eyes, previously frozen over, were now burning with a frantic recognition-fueled fire. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, his voice dropping an octave. Era stared at him, trembling. I was born with it. Why do you care? Min-jae didn't answer. He looked at the mark, then back at the girl who lived in the dirt, his grip tightening. Because, he whispered, the person who wears that mark is supposed to be dead. And she's the only person who can unlock that briefcase. The transition from the sump to the Gilded District was a blur of pressurized airlocks and silent, leather interior maglevs. Era pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching the neon slums shrink into a glowing carpet of misery below. Beside her, Min-jae was a statue. He hadn't spoken since the alley, his gloved hand still white-knuckled around the head of his cane. The arrival. The mansion wasn't a home. It was a fortress of glass and black marble perched on the edge of a cliff. As the doors hissed open, Era was met with a wall of clinical perfection. Take her to the East Wing, Min-jae commanded, his voice tight. Bathe her. Feed her. If a single hair on her head is harmed, I will personally ensure the culprit never sees the sun again. Era bristled, her scavenger instinct screaming trap. I'm not a pet, and I'm definitely not your guest. Just tell me what you want so I can go back to my scrap pile. Min-jae turned, his eyes dark and unreadable. You aren't going back to the scrap, Era. You're far too valuable for the sump to keep. The Velvet Prison. The East Wing was a suite larger than the entire block Era grew up on. Silk sheets, a bath that smelled of jasmine, and a wardrobe filled with clothes that cost more than a year's worth of rations. But the luxury was a lie. Every time she approached the door, two silent guards in obsidian suits stepped into her path. When she looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows, she saw the shimmer of a high-frequency security grid. A gilded cage is still a cage, Era muttered, picking up a delicate porcelain vase and weighing it in her hand. She wondered if the glass was reinforced, and if she could use a shard to pick the electronic lock. The secret directive. While Era paced her room like a caged lynx, Min-jae stood in his private study, the violet data shards flickering on his desk. His second-in-command, Kong, stood at attention. Sir, the council is asking about the scavenger, Kong said, his voice low. They want to know why a street rat is occupying the VIP suite. Let them wonder, Min-jae replied, staring at a holographic image of the birthmark he'd captured in the alley. It was an exact match for the House of Shin Crest, a bloodline wiped out 15 years ago. He pulled a small sealed vial from his pocket. Inside was a single strand of Era's hair, snagged from her jacket. Take this to the underground lab. Run a full genomic sequence against the royal registry. Do it off-grid. If the board finds out I'm looking for a Shin heir, they'll have us both executed before the results are processed. And if it's her, sir? Kong asked. Min-jae looked out at the city he ruled with an iron fist, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. Then the war isn't over. It's just beginning. The night watch. Late that night, Era managed to slip past the first sensor, only to find Min-jae standing on the balcony outside her room. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, looking human for the first time. You can't run from this, Era, he said without turning around. Watch me, she retorted, stepping onto the balcony. He turned then, his gaze dropping to the mark on her shoulder, hidden now by silk. The world thinks you're a ghost. If you leave this house, you'll become one for real. Stay. Eat. Wait for the truth. Your truth or mine? She challenged. Min-jae stepped closer, the smell of sandalwood wrapping around her again. In this city, Era, there is only one truth, power. And you might just be sitting on a throne you never knew existed. The morning light felt cold against the marble floors. Era sat at a long table piled with food she didn't want to touch. Every time she moved, the guards shifted their weight. She felt like a bug under a microscope. The heavy doors swung open. Min-jae walked in holding a single piece of glass paper. His face was pale, and his usual calm mask seemed to have a tiny crack in it. He dismissed the guards with a sharp flick of his wrist. For the first time they were truly alone. The results are back, he said. His voice was a low whisper that echoed in the huge room. He laid the paper on the table in front of her. Lines of glowing DNA sequences mapped out a story she couldn't read. The birthmark wasn't a mistake. You aren't just a scavenger from the sump. Era pushed the paper away. I told you I'm just Era. I fix broken tech and I stay out of trouble. Let me go back. Min-jae stepped closer, leaning over the table. Your name is Seojina. You are the last daughter of the House of Shin. Your family didn't just lose their money. They were erased. Everyone thought you died in the fire 15 years ago. The name felt heavy and wrong in her ears. Seojina. It sounded like someone who wore silk and lived in a palace, not someone who fought over copper wire in the rain. I don't want that name. Era snapped, her voice trembling. That girl died. I survived because I learned how to hide. If I'm who you say I am, then I'm a target. You are a queen, Min-jae corrected, his eyes burning with a strange light. And I am the only one who can put you back on your throne. Era stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. She looked at his hands, hands that ordered deaths and held a city in a grip of fear. There was dried blood figuratively under his fingernails, and she could smell the danger on him like smoke. You live in a world of blood and secrets, Min-jae, she said, backing away toward the window. You don't want to save me. You want to use me. I'd rather be a nobody in the dirt than a trophy for a man like you. Min-jae didn't move to stop her, but his words followed her like a shadow. The sump can't hide you anymore, Gina. The monsters who killed your family are already looking for the girl with the starburst mark. Min-jae did not sleep that night. He sat in his dark office, staring at the old police files from the year 2006. For 15 years, he believed the fire of 2006 had taken everything from him. He remembered the smell of smoke and the way the sky turned orange. Most of all, he remembered the grief that turned his heart into stone. He opened a dusty folder marked with a red seal. Inside were the reports about the Shin family. His eyes skipped over the words until he found the name he was looking for. Seojina. The report said no one survived the fire. It was signed by his most trusted man, Elder Kwon. Kwon had been like a father to Min-jae. He was the one who pulled Min-jae out of the ashes and taught him how to lead the Mafia with an iron fist. But as Min-jae looked at the DNA test on his desk and the old report in his hand, a cold realization washed over him. The math did not add up. If Era was alive, the report was a lie. He called Kwon into the room. The older man walked in slowly, leaning on a cane, his face full of fake kindness. You look tired, Min-jae, Kwon said softly. You should stop worrying about that girl from the sump. Min-jae didn't look up. He kept his eyes on the paper. Tell me about the night of the fire again, Kwon. You told me you searched every room. You told me you saw the bodies. Kwon paused, his breath hitching for just a second. It was a long time ago. It was a tragedy. Why dig up the bones of the dead? Because the dead are walking in my hallway, Min-jae said, finally looking up. His eyes were like shards of ice. You told me my sister was gone. You watched me cry for years while you held the secret in your pocket. Why did you lie to me? Kwon's kind face vanished. His back straightened and the mask fell away. I did it to make you strong, the old man hissed. A leader with a sister is a leader with a weakness. I saved the house by letting that girl stay lost. Min-jae felt a rage he had never known. The man he trusted most had stolen his family for the sake of power. He realized now that the fire wasn't just an accident. It was a trap, and the shadows were still moving in the corners of his own home. Chapter 5. The next morning the silk dresses were gone. In their place sat a suit of black tactical gear and a heavy wooden training knife. Min-jae stood in the center of the marble gym, his shadow long and sharp. He didn't look like a brother or a savior. He looked like a teacher who didn't know how to be kind. If you want to live, you have to be more than a ghost, Min-jae said. He tossed the wooden knife toward Era. She caught it out of the air, her fingers gripping the handle with a natural strength he hadn't expected. The people who tried to burn you away are still in this building. They sit in boardrooms and drink expensive tea. You need to know how to cut through their lies and, if necessary, their throats. The training was brutal. 4 hours Min-jae pushed her. He taught her how to stand so she looked like she owned the room. He showed her how to speak with a voice that didn't shake, even when her heart was screaming. When she tripped, he didn't help her up. He simply waited for her to find her own balance. Again, he barked when she grew tired. In a board meeting, your silence is a weapon. In a hallway, your speed is your life. Look at me, Era. Don't look at the blade. Look at the man holding it. Era wiped sweat from her forehead. Her muscles ached, but a new fire was starting to burn in her chest. She wasn't the scared scavenger from the sump anymore. She realized that Min-jae wasn't trying to change her into a doll. He was turning her into a blade. By sunset, they moved from the gym to the library. Digital screens floated in the air, filled with the names of the men who ran the city. Min-jae pointed to a face on the screen. A man with cold eyes and a fake smile. "This is the board," Min-jae whispered. "They think you are a weakness I am hiding. Tomorrow we will show them you are the storm they forgot to put out. You will walk into that room, you will take your seat, and you will let them see the mark on your shoulder. But remember, never let them see you bleed." Era looked at her reflection in the dark glass. She looked dangerous. She looked like a shin. For the first time, she didn't want to run back to the dirt. She wanted to see the look on their faces when the dead girl walked through the door. The gala was a sea of gold and black. Hundreds of lights hung from the ceiling, making the diamond necklaces in the room sparkle like tiny stars. Era walked beside Min-jae, her back straight and her chin held high. She wore a dress of dark silk that hid the knife strapped to her thigh. To everyone else she looked like a princess. To herself she still felt like a hunter in the dark. Min-jae leaned in close, his voice a low hum. "Do not let them see you blink. Every person in this room is a wolf. They are waiting for you to trip." Era nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She was looking at the faces of the men who had ruled the city while she was eating scraps in the sump. They laughed and drank expensive wine, acting as if the world was a game they had already won. Then the air changed. A thick, heavy smell drifted through the crowd. It was a sweet, earthy scent, the smell of a specific rare cigar. Suddenly, the fancy ballroom vanished. Era was 5 years old again. She was in a hallway filled with orange flames. The smoke was stinging her eyes, and a man was pulling her toward the back door. She remembered the heat of his hand and the way that same sweet smell had been trapped in his clothes. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for the source. There, standing near a tall marble pillar, was Elder Kwon. He was talking to a group of guards, looking calm and wise. But as he raised a hand to point at something, the light caught a heavy gold ring on his finger. It was shaped like a coiled snake with a red stone for an eye. Era froze. That ring had pressed into her skin 20 years ago when the man dragged her through the fire. It wasn't a rescue. It was a kidnapping. He hadn't saved her. He had discarded her in the sump like a piece of broken glass so he could take over her family's power. "It's him," Era whispered, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and cold rage. Min-jae followed her gaze. He saw the way she was looking at Kwon. He saw the terror in her eyes turn into something much sharper. "What did you see, Era?" "The smell," she said, her hand reaching for the hidden knife under her dress. "And the ring. He was there the night everything burned. He didn't just lie about me being dead, Min-jae. He was the one who threw me away." Min-jae's hand tightened on his cane until his knuckles turned white. The music continued to play, and the guests continued to dance, but for the two of them, the war had finally found its face. Min-jae did not wait for the gala to end. He led Era through a side door, his footsteps sounding like thunder on the quiet stone floor. The moment they were back inside the fortress, he stripped off his formal jacket. He looked like a man who was ready to burn the whole world down just to keep one person safe. "Every guard who answers to Kwon is to be removed by morning," Min-jae ordered. His voice was cold and sharp. His men scrambled to follow his commands, sensing the storm that had finally arrived. He spent the next few hours moving through the house like a ghost, checking the locks and setting up new security codes. He was so busy looking for the snake in the grass that he didn't see the shadows gathering outside his gates. Era watched him from the balcony. She could see the stress in the way his shoulders stayed tight. "You're doing exactly what Kwon wants," she said softly as he walked past her. "You're putting all your energy into this room. You're forgetting about the rest of the city." Min-jae stopped, but he didn't look at her. "The city can wait. You are the only thing that matters right now. If I lose you again, there is no empire worth having." It was a beautiful thought, but it was a dangerous one. While Min-jae was busy firing guards and checking cameras, the phones in his office began to ring. Business partners in other countries were calling to ask why their shipments had stopped. The money that usually flowed like a river was starting to dry up. In the dark corners of the city, the other mafia bosses were whispering. They saw the Dragon of the East acting like a man who had lost his mind. They saw him focusing on a single girl instead of the docks, the warehouses, and the streets. For the first time in years, Min-jae looked weak. By midnight, a report came in that changed everything. One of their biggest storehouses had been taken over by a rival gang. Usually, Min-jae would have sent 100 men to take it back. But tonight, he kept his best soldiers at the mansion to stand outside Era's door. "Sir, we are losing control of the south side," Kong whispered, his face full of worry. "The board is meeting in secret. They think you have gone soft. They are planning to replace you." Min-jae finally looked up from the security screens. His eyes were tired, but the fire was still there. He realized he was in a trap. If he stayed to protect Era, he would lose his crown. If he left to save his business, he would leave Era alone with the man who had already tried to kill her once. Era walked over and placed a hand on his arm. She felt the muscle jump under his skin. "Go," she said. "You taught me how to use a knife. Now let me show you that I learned how to survive." The power went out at exactly 2 in the morning. The mansion, once a glowing tower of glass, was suddenly swallowed by the dark. For a moment, the only sound was the wind howling against the windows. Then the glass shattered. Era didn't scream. She had spent her life listening for the sound of danger in the sump, and her body moved before her brain could even think. She grabbed the training knife from under her pillow and slid into the shadow of the wardrobe. Outside her door, she heard the heavy thud of bodies hitting the floor and the muffled pops of silenced guns. The rivals were here, and they weren't looking for a conversation. Min-jae was in the main hall, trapped behind a marble pillar. He had sent his best men to the south side, and now he was outnumbered. The flashes of gunfire lit up the room like lightning, showing the masked men closing in on him. He was a great fighter, but even a dragon can be defeated by a pack of wolves. He didn't know that Era was watching from above. During her weeks of pacing the mansion like a prisoner, she hadn't just looked for exits. She had found the veins of the house. Hidden behind a bookshelf in the library was a narrow maintenance tunnel used for old wiring. It was cramped, dusty, and smelled of oil. It felt just like home. Era crawled through the narrow space, her heart thumping against the metal floor. She moved silently, following the sound of the fighting. She popped open a small ventilation grate right above the balcony overlooking the hall. Below her, 3 men were moving toward Min-jae's blind side, their weapons raised. "Hey!" Era shouted, her voice ringing out like a bell. The men looked up, startled. In that second of confusion, Era didn't just hide. She kicked a heavy decorative statue off the ledge, crashed down, taking 2 of the attackers with it. Before the third man could react, she dropped from the vent, landing lightly on her feet. She didn't use the knife to kill. She used it to strike the man's wrist, making him drop his gun. Min-jae used the opening to finish the fight. When the room finally went quiet, he stood among the ruins of his beautiful home, breathing hard. He looked at Era, who was covered in dust and cobwebs, holding her wooden knife like it was made of the finest steel. "I told you to stay in the room," Min-jae said, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and relief. Era wiped a streak of grease from her cheek and stood tall. "If I had stayed in the room, you would be dead. The sump taught me how to move through the walls, Min-jae. You taught me how to fight. Now stop talking and follow me. I know a way out that isn't on any map." Min-jae looked at the girl he thought he needed to protect. He realized then that she wasn't just a princess to be saved. She was the only person in the city he could actually trust to have his back. The sun rose over a city that felt different than it had the night before. The fire at the estate had been put out, and the smoke was drifting away into the blue sky. Inside the quiet walls of the library, the chaos had finally ended. Elder Quan was gone, taken away in handcuffs after his own guards turned on him, unable to deny the truth any longer. The threat that had followed Era for 20 years was finally broken. Min-jae stood by the large window, looking out at the gilded district. He looked older, his face marked with scratches from the fight, but his eyes were clear. He turned when he heard Era enter the room. She wasn't wearing the tactical gear anymore. She had washed the soot from her face, though she still moved with the quick, sharp energy of the girl from the sump. "The board is waiting downstairs," Min-jae said softly. "They are afraid. They know that the old lies are dead, and they are wondering who will lead them now." Era walked toward him. She didn't look afraid of the big house or the powerful people anymore. "They should be afraid," she replied. "The city lived on secrets for too long. Minjae reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon. It sparkled in the morning light, hanging from a thin, strong chain. He stepped behind her and carefully placed the jewelry around her neck. The cool metal rested right above the starburst birthmark on her skin. "For 15 years I thought I was the last one left," Minjae whispered as he clicked the clasp shut. "I built an empire because I had nothing else. But this pendant belongs to the CO family. It means you aren't a guest here, and you aren't just a scavenger I found in the dirt. You are my sister. You are a partner." Era looked at her reflection in the glass. The crescent moon sat perfectly against her shoulder. It was a symbol that everyone in the underworld would recognize. It told the world that if they touched her, they would have to face the dragon, and if they touched him, they would have to face the girl who knew how to survive in the dark. "The CO family is back," Era said, her voice steady and loud. Minjae offered her his arm. He didn't lead her this time. They walked side by side. As they headed toward the grand staircase to meet the waiting council, the scavenger and the suit were gone. In their place stood two survivors ready to rule. The era of hiding was over, and a new story was just beginning.